Hi, this is a reminder that most of the discourse around Uraume and Kirara is rooted in homophobia, transphobia, ignorance, or just being immature, not being old enough. This is like my third time trying to film this. I'm super bad at using TikToks, but I don't feel like making a whole video production. But let's get into it. So for reference, I'm a Hakari cosplayer. I have been one for the past 2 years, which means that not only do I get harassed by the way I speak, but how I look, daily. It's been like that for at least a year now of just straight harassment. But on top of that, even though it's not necessarily directed towards me in real life, I get a ton of homophobic and transphobic discourse and comments in my comment section relating to the character and his relationships to other characters. I also get a ton of these comments when I work with cosplayers who cosplay these characters as well. So TLDR, I'm not just making stuff up, I'm speaking from experience. And the truth is, most of these conversations really not are about if Kirara is a boy. It's not about if Uraume is a girl or a boy or if they're trans. It's not about if Hakari is gay or Sukuna is gay. That's why there's no resolution. The real conversation is really, do you believe in non-binary and trans people, and do you think that being gay is bad? Because for most of the conversations, if you actually believe and accept non-binary and trans people, and you aren't homophobic and transphobic, the conversations aren't that deep. They're not that intense. They're just a simple daily conversation. Obviously, there's exceptions because you can talk about gender and identity and how they're portrayed. But I'm talking about like most of the heated conversations, the ones that get really emotional and are both sides have a point kind of thing, are just homophobia and transphobia. The huge irony is that most of these characters in this manga don't care that much about identity. Like, obviously, there's nuance, but like Uraume, Sukuna, they're villains, and they don't really care about gender and identity. Yet the fandom obsesses over it. Like, they don't understand the characters. Like, how are you a fan of these characters but don't understand their perspectives and empathize with them? I mentioned immaturity, and I do want to remind people that a lot of the worst conversations I've seen have come from excuse me, I saw someone post about the Shibuya incident, and I almost said incident, have come from teenagers within this community. At least for me, I have started to check profiles a lot more whenever I get something that's homophobic, transphobic, racist, or just rude. Most of the time it's like 13, 15, 17, occasionally 18, still teenager. And while I think teenagers should be held accountable when necessary, I know that a lot of teenagers just try to be edgy and say things and are not monitored. So I keep a space in my brain. I'm like, okay, I'm not talking to an actual functioning adult. I am talking to a teenager who thinks they're funny. And a lot of the times they tell me that they think they're funny. And I'm like, you're not funny. And I delete, block, whatever. But yes, there are still some adults who are not teenagers and are fully functional, but they are homophobic and transphobic, and that's why these conversations continue to happen. And on that note, the last thing I want to mention is that like a lot of you who think that gender and identity strongly matter, and you're like, I hope Kirara's not a boy because that would mean Hakari is gay. You will not have the range to fully understand someone's identity if you're not an ally, trans, or gay, or anything under those umbrellas. That's kind of how it is. Like, if you really think that gender is what's between your legs, then you will not fully have the range to argue about someone's identity. Similarly, yet still different, if you do not understand any Japanese, if you don't understand anything about the culture, if you've never spoken to Japanese people, you will not fully be able to have a productive conversation about Japanese society, Jujutsu Kaisen, how the characters fit in that world, because it is modeled after Japan, written by a Japanese person. If you watch an anime subbed or dubbed and not directly in Japanese, or read it directly in Japanese, unless you have some sort of spark notes or understand the culture, you are always going to miss context. So I encourage you when you're having these conversations to speak to people who match the subject matter, I suppose. I don't know how to properly say that. I haven't planned this, I haven't scripted this as usual. But for example, I've talked to gay people, I've talked to trans people, I've talked to people who are assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. I've talked to people who are not American. I've talked to people who live in Japan, people who are Japanese, non-binary, or trans, or who speak Japanese, or non-binary, or gay, right? I'm speaking to people with all these different perspectives instead of just talking as a cis male from America. A lot of people love to use the argument of Megami asking if Kirara is a boy and Panda saying yes as like kind of like the final straw, like you can't cross this, like nothing can be argued against that, without actually looking at the full context of the manga in Japanese society, without actually looking at what it's like to be non-binary and not actually having the full language or the support to discuss being non-binary or trans, because Japanese language just hasn't caught up to it yet. As compared to American culture, or American language, we do have a bit more room to discuss identity and individualism. People will fixate on Panda calling Kirara a boy as if JJK characters haven't been wrong before, as if Panda wasn't a stranger to Kirara, And then when asked about Hakugi saying he doesn't want to be in the same room as a boy and like why he's so flirty with Kirara, it's crickets. They just go back to well, she's a boy because Panda says so. Again, there's always nuance missing, and whether or not they're boy or girl or non-binary, whether we're talking about Uraume or Kirara, how people approach the conversation really says a lot about whether or not you're homophobic or transphobic, pretty much.